I'm getting my steps in today. Our next guests have spent a majority of their careers pushing policy reform in the defense world. Please welcome to the stage WestExec Advisors co-founder and managing partner Michèle Flournoy and former House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mac Thornberry. So I think I dropped the phrase backstage, nomination madness. Last night I had to rewrite the newsletter like 6 times, and that was just for Defense Secretary pick. Obviously we have some more happening today. We have DNI Tulsi Gabbard potentially, Attorney General Matt Gaetz potentially, and DefSec Pete Hegseth potentially, unless that has changed in the past hour. What do you make of all of this? What are the consequences of these picks? And what's the reality of forming one's cabinet?
Well, I think that at this moment, we are at a particular moment of challenge as a nation when you look out at the world. And we've got some major priorities, particularly in the national security domain, that we have to focus on. Number 1 is deterring great power conflict. Number 2 is accelerating innovation adoption so the U.S. military remains the most capable lethal fighting force in the world, keep our military edge. And number 3 is really doubling down on the most capable allies and their capabilities so that we never fight alone. These are pretty big issues, and so I think those need to be the standards by which we're evaluating particularly the national security nominees and particularly the SecDef, because the next SecDef, in the next 4 years, at least several things have to happen, but one is we've really got to accelerate innovation adoption, and that means not only just figuring out, getting new technologies across the Valley of Death and into the DoD program, but realigning the incentives for the acquisition professionals, the contracting professionals, so that they know how to do agile development and work with software companies. We've also got some fundamentally broken parts of our modernization program, shipbuilding. Bill LaPlante talked about restocking munitions. We've got a defense industrial base resilience problem that needs to be fixed. And we've got some work to do in terms of recruiting and developing and retaining the talent, particularly tech talent, we're going to need for the future. So these are big problems. So we need a nominee who's got, no kidding, deep experience in government, in driving change in a large, complex organization. DoD is probably the biggest bureaucracy in the world, certainly one of them. This really matters because how this shakes out and whether those things can happen over the next 4 years could determine the difference of whether we succeed or fail in deterrence. So the stakes are very, very high, and I would hope that the U.S. Senate would use those kinds of criteria for evaluating some of these candidates.
Mac, I'm going to pull the Congress card on you. What do you think is running through the minds of our lawmakers, and what are those stakes, to Michèle's point?
Well, one thing I learned over the years is never presume what the Senate will or will not do as a House guy.
Yeah, fair.
So I'm sure they will take their time and ask the right questions. But to Michèle's point, the stakes are incredibly high. The Commission on the National Defense Strategy said it's the most dangerous time
and the
most complex time, at least since the end of the Cold War, and maybe going all the way back. So the stakes are incredibly high. And similar to Michèle's point, to me, the most important thing that needs to come out of the Department of Defense is getting modern technology into the hands of the warfighter in a time that matters and at a scale that matters. And if you ask me on the intelligence side, we are seeing unprecedented cooperation among adversaries. That has got to be a focus of the whole intelligence community, and who can best help us learn more about that, shine a light on it, and figure out how to deal with it. I think those are the key questions.
So when the administration does get behind the desk in the Pentagon, what will be on that desk? What are those most pressing issues? I think you hit on it a little bit in your last remarks there, but if we want to flesh those out, that'd be great.
Sure. I think, again, scaling innovation adoption, what do I mean by that? The department is still toying with small-scale applications of AI, for example, but we're not adopting it well, we're not adopting it, period, but we should be responsibly adopting it at the enterprise level for all kinds of functions, from helping us get to better predictive intelligence, decision support, human-machine teaming, predictive analytics for maintenance and logistics. I mean, there's just all kinds of ways, but we're still kind of stuck at the baby step level. That has to change because our adversaries are adopting at scale and with speed. And so we have got to crack that code. Unmanned systems, figuring out how to integrate unmanned systems to buy back mass and range and effectiveness against adversaries. What's happened in Ukraine is a changing character of warfare. And the replicator program is great as a sort of initial step, but again, we've got to scale that kind of thing so that it's an integrated part of, under the sea, on the sea, in the air, and so forth, if we're really going to keep our advantage. So that's a key part. And there are key parts of the modernization program that really do need attention: munitions, shipbuilding, and so forth. And I think this administration's made a good start in that area, but that's where the attention has to be focused, not on trying to purge woke generals or give people in the military who take an oath to the Constitution loyalty tests or that kind of thing. I mean, if you start kind of culture wars within the military, that's just not going to be helpful. We have bigger fish to fry as a nation, and whether we meet those objectives will determine whether we prevent major wars in the coming years. I really believe that. The stakes could not be higher. We have got to focus on the right things.
Mac, I imagine you'd agree with what Michèle is saying about unmanned, tech adoption, speed.
Absolutely. As I say, it's getting modern technology into the hands of the warfighter, Michèle says, at scale and at a time that matters. If we're 5 years too late, it won't matter. What challenges us today is a lot of that tech is in the private sector. They're not only have it, they're leading it. And so the relationship between companies and DoD has to change. Because if we go through the traditional lawyers and accountants and regulations, we're not going to be there in a time frame that actually matters. Let me just mention a couple other things. One is the return of nuclear deterrence. For the first time, we have two peer adversaries when it comes to nuclear, and been talking up here some on the stage about some of the legs of the triad. We don't even really talk about the characteristics of the weapons themselves, which we need to start having a discussion about. And at the other end, in some ways of the spectrum, it's gray zone stuff, information type warfare, targeted bioweapons. There's a whole range of threats that combine to make this that dangerous time that Michèle and the commission have talked about.
So the first time I started writing about you was when I was covering the Savannah River site down in South Carolina. The mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility turned into the plutonium, I forget, PFFF, something like that. I forget. It was a lot of F's in the acronym. People don't, I think, appreciate the NNSA side of the nuclear weapons art, right? Like pit production is way behind schedule. Right. It's not going to hit that 2030 mark for W87-1, I believe. What is that relationship between the two agencies, and how do you think it could be improved in terms of actual production or meeting milestones?
Well,
is it an infrastructure issue?
It is partly an infrastructure issue because we haven't built new weapons in so long. But I would even take a step back from that. We have not even allowed ourselves to think about the characteristics needed of weapons to deter two adversaries who have much more modern weapons than we do. Russia and China, for example, have continued to build their nuclear weapons. We're still hanging on to relics of the Reagan era. That were designed for a different purpose. So we need to think about what deterrence means in the world we live in, and then have the infrastructure and be able to actually consider designs that fit that world. And that's on the nuclear side. But I am concerned that deterrence in all sorts of ways is eroding. And the best thing we can do is strengthen our military and make it clear that we are united and determined so that adversaries know not only do we have this stuff, but we have the commanders. Let's get back to Michèle's point about turmoil within the ranks doesn't do anything but undermine the deterrence that we're hoping to achieve.
Anything
And
to add?
I would just add, allies really matter. One of the things that gets China's attention is when they overstep, and not only the United States responds, but a number of allies respond: Australia, Japan, South Korea, partners like India, some of the ASEAN states. When it's a multifaceted reaction, they tend to at least recalibrate or rethink. So those alliances and partnerships are really, really important from a strategic perspective. And I'm just hoping that we don't take too transactional an approach that just focuses only on the burden sharing element or what have you. Burden sharing is very important. It's a legitimate issue. But there's real strategic value to some of these relationships, and these are, in some cases, allies that will bring real capability to deterrence and to the fight if we ever need them. And we want to keep that in mind as we manage those relationships.
So we're running a little short on time, but I do want to jump back to gray zone, as you mentioned. I've written in the past, based on some studies, that the US is losing the information warfare game. We just survived a presidential election, and there's been tons of reporting about that. 30 seconds, maybe 15 seconds each. I know that's tough, but where are we at with gray zone information warfare, cyber? What can be improved?
I think we're doing reasonably well on cyber defense and offense, but in the information space, I think we need a digital version of USIA. I mean, we need a 21st century effort that is really focused on combating false, misinformation, disinformation, particularly when it undermines our interests. And we don't have that team, we don't have the resources, we don't have the organization, the concept. We need to build that.
You get the last word.
Adversaries are trying to undermine our will to resist by sowing or fueling dissensions internally. It doesn't really matter as much who wins, it's just that we're fighting each other. And we're not in the game of information warfare. If they can win without firing a shot, man, that's the best thing in the world for them.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you, Michèle. Thank you, Mac, for your time and being on stage today.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.